Um, so, good morning, and is this functional? Yes. So, it's lovely to be here, even in this deluge, to talk about a very, very interesting body of research. And to begin with, I have to say that this is not light reading. This is something that one has to delve into very intensely in order to even engage with the kind of ideas and the philosophies that have come across in the book. Besides, of course, Sousa's work that is so powerful and so moving, and the words and the images together, I think, lead us into many different worlds. So I'd like to actually begin by reading out one small piece from the book, um, which leads to my first question. So for all those of you who have the book, it's page 58. Um, Contrary to her jaded erotic image in Sousa's female drawings, the woman is constructed and managed internally, no longer exposed and vulnerable, but assertive and powerful, emphatically nude but not naked. His expressionist strokes carved terrifying unnatural anatomy, such as misplaced organs, additional limbs, and contemplations of the circle, monstrous and otherworldly. I mean, that is simply a small, sample of the kinds of words that have been used. So, Janita, my first question actually is you have from fertility goddesses to yoginis, Japanese ukiyo-e and shunga imagery, and divine depictions of the Virgin, so many characters, Laja Gauri and Artemis, Susanna, so many of them. So, how was your journey connecting these various forms of feminine energy with Sousa's work as a central motive?
All right. So actually, that is what drew me in. I walked into an exhibition gallery and I was just like, I didn't enter, but from the window, I saw this nude, a golden nude. Oh, yeah. So I was entering into the gallery, and through the window glass, I saw the golden nude, and I just stood arrested over there. Yeah. And when I stepped into the gallery later, I saw this gallery. It was in a semicircular design, and there were these frames all along the walls, the creamy walls, and they were all nudes, yes. And they told me the artist, and in other words, the famous artist was dead. And so I looked at that, and it was very weird. And I imagined myself as the golden maid.
Okay.
Yeah, and I thought that this is so different. She's so distinctive and, in a way, also perplexing and original. All right. So, is it better now? Yes. Okay. And but there's not much literature which exists on Sousa's works. There's no critical study or scholarly work on his artwork. And so I had to then refer to and also research archetypal images uh, from the East and West, artworks, that is, work by great artists, as well the philosophies and psychologies, and also anthropology. So when I went looking, and what I would say is that critical writing or critical thinking is um, heightened self-reflection.
Alright.
So when you see something, you go into a contemplation, and the image stays with you. And whatever little insight that you perceived at that time, it's there, it gestates for quite some time, and you're ruminating on it. And in the period of rumination and contemplation is when you are led to certain other resonating images or study. And that's how it recurred again and again. So I would just be there, okay, with that, and then maybe across the internet or something in my subconscious which I'd read before, like Stella Kramer's studies is something which was already with me, so I began reading her texts all over again. Yeah, and I saw that the sculptures that she had talked of and analyzed, and how they resonate with what Sousa was doing. You know, the plastic carving of the limbs and the rotund body. Yeah. And also then I came across Nenit Solomon's research.
Right.
Yes, in Griselda Pollock's book, where she has gone back to the first sculpture, the first female nude which is carved by Praxiteles. And here, yeah, I must mention this, that there's a quote by Sousa in which he says that to understand modern painting, one has to go back into art history, from Praxiteles to Picasso,
Right.
from Han to Manchu dynasty, and from Mohenjo-daro to Francis Newton Sousa. And that was so beautiful. And I thought, oh, he's telling me, you know, I have to go back to art history. I have to go to the Greek classical period. I have to go back to Mohenjo-daro and draw my references from there. So Nenit Solomon's research is to do with Greek classical art, of how the statue of Aphrodite of Knidos was sculpted by Praxiteles. So then I traced that lineage from there and how it traveled through art history for 2,500 years, the metamorphosis, and then how it was perceived by the modern artists abroad and in India, and then it came to Sousa, and what Sousa did with that. Yeah? So like that, ukiyo-e, the Shunga series in Japanese art, which is, you know, which was so prevalent from the 17th to the 19th century, is where, like Kama Sutra belongs to that genre of high classical literature. Ukiyo-e are 6 sex manuals, okay, but they are very popular amongst friends, lovers, and they are presented to the bride when she is, you know, getting married. And so the compositions, the ways to practice healthy sexuality, the whole physiology of the human body, the male and the female, art of flirting, all this is a part of so it's an art, right? And in Japan, this is like popular books which are just lying around. And it's so mainstream and it's so earthy and natural. Yeah, so I took references from that. And so and then Vidya the Hijaz studies, I think, which we'll come to a little later with the red goddess, and I'll go a little more into that, of how the Lajja Gauri, which is such a controversial, unconscious imagery in human psyche, especially in the Indian subcontinent and you know the Eastern world, and how she has, you know, studied that, and how Sousa is painting when he was just 17 years old. Yeah, a boy artist at that time, a young artist. And imagine, an artist at that age, just 16 years old, when he came out with his first set of paintings, is when you give a thought to that, and I thought, we are so conflicted by our sexual identity at that age, you know, with the undergirding of didactic parental scripts, the brutal state and religious machinery, mangled human instincts within yourself, yeah, socio-cultural mappings.
Yes.
So, yeah, all this, and this young artist came out with this female nude 1940, which in the book I have said that he carved the female nude. You know, he painted that mapping it on the cosmologies of Jainism and Buddhism. So I call it the Loka Prakriti,
Right.
the cosmic woman.
Cosmic
That
woman.
particular painting, I've analyzed that, taking cues from Chitra, yeah, the text, the Indian text on Indian arts and dance. So yeah, so that's another cue. And then of course the Yogini temples of India. Yeah.
Yes.
The Yogini temples and how they were so shrouded and kept in secrecy. And they were, there was like Vidyadhari had to go there with a police guard. And those Chotsat yoginis, yeah, and it's a circular temple. And how they just are so boldly formidable, they're standing there, so managed and constructed internally. Yeah, and they were worshipped for their siddhis, and people were kind of venerated them, and also they were afraid of them.
Right.
Yeah, so there was
this
this
power.
very chaotic, uneasy space surrounding all this kind of imagery through history, and what he has done with it. I'd also like to add here um, the anima in Carl Jungian studies, because the book began as a quest to seek answers to life, body, and sexuality. And actually, the book wouldn't have begun if I had not been steeped in Carl Jung studies or Carl Jung psychology for a long time. It's because Jungian psychology came together with Souza's artwork is that I started perceiving new insights. And in Jungian psychology, the anima, that is the inner feminine in masculine psychology, plays a very important role. And in balancing that, a man, goes into a lot of creative work if he's creative, or there are many, many other channels of how he balances the inner feminine and not, he doesn't keep projecting it on other women around him.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
So
yes.
there are all these, yeah.
Yes, it's in fact one philosophy segues into another in this very, very beautiful journey through the book. But coming now to some of the work itself, it has been discussed that Souza, of course, has been a discomforting presence, as you say in the book, in Indian art history itself. So, would you maybe elaborate on the kind of reasons for this? Of course, we do know that people perceive the content of the work in a very narrow way, perhaps for some time. But does the book sort of address this and counteract it also, perhaps? And maybe with that, can you speak about a few examples of work that you studied?
Yeah, so like I said, in 2011 to 2013, I was going through a personal crisis. I was on a self healing journey. And I was much into readings of literature and art, looking at art and also theatre. I was reading great playwrights and also religious scriptures because I was finding, trying to find healing and balance for my own psyche.
Mm-hmm.
And though I had seen Souza's art much before that, in the beginning of the millennium, when my husband was posted in Bombay, and I came across his work as group exhibitions of the PhD artists.
Right.
But that time I identified with him as a group, not exclusively being connected to him. But by the end of that decade, when I was going through a personal crisis, right, and I was on this healing journey, is when I looked at his art again.
Okay.
And by that time, my study in Jungian psychology had completed a decade or more than that. And like I said, I began perceiving different insights. So when I looked at Souza's paintings at that time, is when I saw shadows and archetypes dancing on his canvases.
Right. You say that they spoke
Yeah,
to you.
they spoke to me, those shadows. So he was painting everything that is rejected and suppressed by human society. Everything, yeah? And so he was speaking about the denied feminine principle, which he went with in a very big way. He was speaking about evil, because this whole emphasis in religions is about to be good and virtuous, right? And we get so taken away with that kind of energy that we do not really look at the dark side. And Sousa said that from Gandhi, he imbibed the spirit of freedom. And Gandhi is a psychoanalytic anarchist. He came out with the philosophy of non-violence, of how to transmute violence into non-violence. Yeah? It's only when you engage with the shadow, violence, anger, jealousy, sexuality, shame, sin. It's only when you engage with these dark spaces can you then go through a transformation where each human being becomes like a crucible, a kind of a crucible of conflict.
Right.
And these polarities, like good and evil is a polarity, masculine, feminine, yeah, the virtuous and the profane, sacred and the profane.
Yeah.
So these polarities which trouble us so much, and we usually occupy an extreme position. We are with one polarity or the other, right? And it's only when these two come together in your consciousness, you become a crucible. There's a lot of pain. Yeah,
Right.
that journey of transformation is happening. And then you come to some kind of a balance. You understand what the polarities, and you choose something for yourself. So what is Sousa doing? He's putting the shadow out there, because we brushed it under the
discomfort.
carpet for so long.
Yeah.
All that uneasy space, he's pulling out from under the carpet and
Putting it there.
in footsteps with Carl Jung psychology. Now, Carl Jung and Sousa are contemporaries, there are overlapping years. And then my mind went to, an epo is to do with some kind of energies in a particular epo. So if we go, like, you are a research person, all right? So you know about this, that people staying in different corners of the world, they connect to those energies of that epoch, of that century, of that time. And even then, they don't know each other. Like in the book, I've also brought out the study of Didi Kosami.
Yes.
Yes, of how we undertook this project of the fertility cult, the mother goddess in the Konkan belt. And then it came out in Myth and Reality.
Right.
But that was, Sousa was in step with him 15 years before the book came out. Suda's already painting those kind of figures. He's not
Yes,
calling them
the
goddesses.
Pala ones.
Yeah. He's painting those women,
Yeah.
looking so strong and formidable.
Right.
So similarly, Carl Jung is in some part, he's in Switzerland doing his thing, and Sousa is in India, and later he's in London. But they're connecting to those energies, and they're speaking the same vocabulary. He's doing it in the form of painting. Carl Jung is doing it in the form of his psychological studies, and he's writing his book and things like that. And also, I would say that these two, like now Conor Macklin, in a conversation with him, he said, we're trying to, Sousa as a post-war British artist is what they're trying. Why? Because the two world wars got over, and these people are playing the field, and these people are thinkers, they're intellectuals. Sousa's every painting is nothing else but cerebral painting. It's the idea on the canvas, right? And so these deep thinkers, they are thinking why we do what we do. They're questioning the human consciousness. We fought 2 world wars. And our whole thrust in religion and the spirituality we follow is to be good, to be virtuous, to be kind, to be. And what are we doing? So every great thinker in this phase of time is thinking, what is this we are doing? Why did we come to this?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So many things came together for the both of them. For me, I'm on my inner journey in 2011, and my whole approach is I'm going in, and it's like I I want to know more about my personal unconscious, which is making me unbalanced. And this personal unconscious of every human being, what is the undergirding is the collective human unconscious,
Right.
from which everything is drawn and it comes into, it becomes my story or my mythology and so on. So it's my personal aim. I'm trying to find balance. I'm going through it, and there's Suzanne Azar, there's Carl Jung, and then all your tree.
The tree.
Leena gave me a beautiful analogy. Like she's been engaging with my book for the past week, and she gave me a beautiful analogy of a tree. So all those branches,
Yes,
then it's all going
absolutely.
into all this. Yeah. So I hope I've
Completely.
answered your question a little.
Yes, absolutely. And coming now to the relationship with Goa, actually, moving back in time, you in fact have written an entire section through Souza's voice. And that is very interesting because you're actually putting yourself in his soul, as it were, and looking at the world through that. So how did that happen, and how did that come about? It also gives a very vivid picture of this place.
Mm.
So I'd like you to maybe comment on both those things.
All right. So actually, that came about because of the Goa Writers Group. That they wanted to do a project and come out with a book on, they called it the Goa Childhood Project. And so they gave an open call to writers, and they said that, many of them have been born here, they belong to Goa. And they said, so this was
Just
to
a
the
moment.
writers. So this was the writers staying in Goa and also the diaspora, all over. And they said that, so we want writings on your childhood. And I'm part of the Goa Writers Group. And I thought, oh yeah, I am based in Goa, but I wasn't born here. And so, and I wanted to be, and I don't know, it just like something clicked in my mind. And I thought, I'm already on this research project. Yeah. And I think this was in 2016 or 17. I don't exactly remember.
Mm.
And so I thought, I know much about Souza. Yeah, is like in Jungian psychology, it is like personality 1 and 2. So my book is actually exclusively personality 2, his inner life.
Right.
Yeah, his unconscious, conscious process and his inner life. And personality number 1, but I know the story of his ego consciousness, of what he did in his external life. And so I thought, okay, so they want us to write on childhood. So I'm going to take on I'm going to impersonate Souza's voice. And through my own interpretation of his writings, his autobiographical writings, and his visual imagery on the canvas, which I'm aligned to so much. And so I'm going to write in his voice, the first voice. And that's how that essay came about. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I just imagine of how he would be in Goa and Bombay, and he was born into a Catholic family, but also there were these zatras happening, the temple festivals, and he would have seen Devdasis, those
Yes.
called Kalavans,
Yes.
dancing to legends of Durga and Kali. And also then I went into my research into Yakshagana plays.
All right.
Okay, and I've given a reference of 2 books which I
Right.
read on that, and I also spoke to a few people in Goa. So Yakshagana plays, they used to dance to the legendary queens of Karnataka, like Abaka Mahadevi and Kittur Chinnamma.
Yes,
Yeah.
Kittur Chinnamma.
Yeah. And there are 2 more names
Yes.
there. So how they fought against the British and also the Portuguese, and they
Yes.
did not let them take over their kingdom. So they were these
Yes.
women warriors. And Souza, of what drew me in right in the beginning was, like I said, his formidable images, like the heads and the female nude. Now the heads, Souza is one of artists who came out with female heads. Nobody has gone into that. We have mutant heads by Leonardo da Vinci. Then I traced it back to the heads, went through like how I did for the body. So now I trace the heads back. So
Right.
Leonardo da Vinci had mutant heads, and then there's of course Bacon's
Yes.
studies are there, and but Sousa was doing women heads. A head which is so contemplative, pensive, very intellectual heads. So maybe it was like the Durga or the Kali or the Kittur Chinnama, the stories that he watched as a growing boy in those zatras, in the
Yes.
Yakshagana plays. Yeah, so all that I brought in the essay along with the beautiful landscape, the stained glass windows.
Yes.
So how he did
Yes.
one Golgotha of Goa is a painting that I have, and the fields, those paintings, and then I end with those heads. Then I go on to and I end the essay with that he did a study of Botticelli Venus, but here he just the head of Venus. Yeah, and the head of Venus that he sketches, she's got wavy hair, not compromised by her maternal instinct and virginity, but her lips are open. She's telling her story.
Right.
So it's a very determining head, very different from how Virgin, Mother Mary is carved in paintings. So he's thinking and he's going on. And there's another one which I got, another painting is of his, which I'm saying could be his of his mother, like she, because I start the essay with that. What's the first line? My first memory of my mother is a woman in black.
Yes. That's how it's
So she negotiated Goan Catholic society as a widow.
complex.
Yeah, and then she disguised herself and she goes to Bombay because she's got the guts and she's got the presence, and maybe that time we didn't call them that, but they were feminist women. His mother,
Right.
his wife, his partners, they were all
Yes.
feminist women, which I brought in my essay 5.
Yes.
Yeah. So in that painting, I'm saying, in fact, I have a Vignesh. I
Yeah.
have that painting in the slide. If you take it forward, please take it forward. Yeah, go down, down. Yeah, till I tell you. This one. Yeah. Why isn't it seen fully? Yeah. Yeah. So this is the painting that I have analyzed. Is that this is the he sketched a matriarch, standing straight, conventions of society. She's following the convention of society. She's mature, she's steady, she's conventional, and maybe a heavy weight on her shoulders. But within that, he carves this young girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, an energy maybe that he was connected to in her odd moments when she was so jubilant and vivacious and so vigorous.
It's like a secondary.
And so it is this young girl inside that widow, that woman who's standing there, and she's got her arms, she's raised it up. It's like she wants to sing and dance and give way to that potential energy which is within her. Such a psychological painting. Would you say that for a young boy? This is when he's in college.
Mm.
There's
I've
another
seen
one
this
after
painting.
this.
I've seen this painting.
This
One
is a
which
sketch.
The young girl is painted
Yeah.
on the back side.
At the back side, yeah. The
And then it
verso,
shows through.
it shows through. It shows through, yeah. There's another one after this. The four running girls on the beach. Yeah. That women have let their hair down. They are being themselves and they are enjoying themselves. They're running on the beach. So maybe he gave vent to this potential energy of women, which wasn't allowed to be expressed, and they couldn't be themselves. Yeah. So that's how I've spoken in the first voice. Yeah. That's my
Right.
own interpretation. Yeah.
So you in fact mentioned heads just now, which brings me in fact to another part. You have discussed certain sections for, the artist's penchant for the grotesque,
Yeah.
and the involving, of course, the unconscious and the psyche.
Hmm.
And how do you read these now in a sort of contemporary socio-cultural discourse? Because this sort of metaphorically speaking, there is a kind of ugliness that we see every now and then, which is part of the human psyche.
Hmm.
So what is your commentary through this entire exercise on what we are living through now?
Yeah, so I would say that the grotesque, like he's the champion of grotesque, and through that he is there. But those grotesque paintings are they're sublime, magnificent. He's subverting order and authority and assumptions. He's subverting it and showing us wonder and shock. Maybe we're shocked by it. Yeah. So, leading us to wonder and shock. Um, so what he's doing is like in the you want me to the contemporary social. Yeah. So here we are like the contemporary topical issues are finding our identity, sexual and gender issues going on. This is a raging conversation.
Yes.
And so he is bringing out the forbidden, the hidden, the unspoken, the interiority of the human psyche and consciousness. Yeah. I think I marked a paragraph which I'd like to read a few lines, and that will answer your question. Souza's grotesque realism, much in line with Bakhtin's, shuns moral virtuous positions. Rather, it portrays in an exaggerated idiom the human condition characterized by the constant need to satisfy primal urges, deification, copulation, pregnancy, and birth. In its degrading quality is folded a regenerative power. Souza celebrates bad taste and in the process embraces the real. So that bad taste could also be evil, like he's done a painting on the Pope, the death of Pope.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it could be to do with power and authority, which is not spoken about in apparent terms, but then it's like that person's ambition, and his whole life is mapped towards that.
Yes.
So in he celebrates bad taste or those dark energies, and in the process he embraces the real because that is what is happening in reality, which is being played out, but in covert ways, in subtle ways, in manipulative ways. But he's
Yeah.
putting it there.
Right.
Yeah?
Yes.
Even the six gentlemen of our times is to do with that. It's bringing out their thoughts and ideas
Yeah.
and qualities to the surface through that
Right.
grotesque,
Yes.
through the distortion.
Yes.
So I'll just read the last line here. So the figures may appear revolting and disgusting, but by suspending rules and customs, Souza establishes a connection to fruitful earth, conceiving and leading to jouissance. It's like when we balance the light with the shadow, it's when joy
Rises.
where we can dance. Yeah? Like the Shiva is the Ardhanareshwara, so the feminine and the masculine come together, and then he dances the tandem. Yeah, so the opposites polarities have to come together. We can't just do away with the shadow. We have to.
So,
The shadow is so important for balance and health. Yeah. So that what is hidden and repressed he glorifies and projects it on the outside, thus deforming the external to a grotesque configuration. I believe the idea behind his portrayal is that if we can see it, is that if we can see it, we can then begin to establish a conscious relationship to it.
Yes, absolutely. That was a very
Yeah.
powerful
Yeah.
statement.
So that's what, like in contemporary times, if whatever that we have relegated and made it obscure and,
Yeah.
and rejected and suppressed it,
Mm.
bring it out, engage with it through different
Yeah.
ways. And that's how, when you become aware and conscious, that you are alerted to its existence, and then you can do something about it.
Right.
There's another quote. It's, I think, in the fourth section. Yeah, in this chapter, which is very on the same lines. Ah, yeah. There's this chapter, Susa painted hell, I think, in the index. Yeah, 190. Yeah. The American journalist and writer Shankar Vedantam puts it beautifully. Good people are not those who lack flaws. The brave are not those who feel no fear. And the generous are not those who've never been selfish. Extraordinary people are not extraordinary because they are invulnerable to unconscious biases. They are extraordinary because they choose to do something about it.
Yeah. It's that choice.
They choose to do something about it. So, first of all, become identified with your unconscious biases, whatever they are.
Right.
It's to do with segregation, with discrimination, whatever. So, then become conscious of that, and then. So, that's what he's doing through the grotesque.
Right. Yes.
Bringing out our
absolutely
unconscious
makes sense.
biases to the surface.
Yes.
It should help us so much in these times.
Certainly. In fact, I think that there are many of these readings that we often overlook entirely in the, I think, in identification with processes and technique and painting methods. I think very often we lose the stories that are actually coming across from behind this. So, sort of moving here now to another area that you have covered. Um, in the book it says, in liberating women sexually through the depictions, he is liberating himself. And you also sort of label him as a kind of feminist uh, hero, almost. Feminist artist,
Yeah.
someone who has actually engaged with feminism through his work. So, maybe I think that maybe it's not only him, there may be other artists also who have done the same. And I wanted to ask you whether you did, in fact, locate and talk about other artists who have been similar in their approach. And the other part of this question is, would you also share maybe a couple of works that actually bring to light this very idea?
So yeah, when I looked at other artists in the Indian art scene, yeah, I felt that most of them struggle with the feminine principle, and it's like to do with our conditioning, to do with the way our society is structured, and like I said, the denied feminine principle. So they struggled, and they were not very versatile, and they couldn't really, like I've used a quote of Ursula, Gwyn, in which I say that the modern woman was invented many times, but it just didn't take to the market.
Oh, right. So
So,
I think the mic
oh yeah,
generator, sorry.
yeah. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah,
Because
again.
it's raining and
Yeah. So like I said, most of them struggled and they couldn't really express themselves or give her that kind, the whole gamut of emotions, like she's frustrated or an internal tussle going on, or in her element, like Susan does. Like he's got women standing and laughing, Susan.
yeah.
Maybe it's a triumphant woo or maddening laughter that is for us to decide. And then the woman caught in an agonized moment, another one who just stands matter of fact. So there's nothing self-conscious, self-effacing, shrinking, or sheepish about this woman.
Yeah.
So other artists, I struggle to find someone like that who's so comfortable with the with the feminine psychology.
Right.
And good and bad women, he broke all those barriers. Lakshma Gal
Okay.
is where I came upon, but he would intersperse it in those rural realities.
Yeah, a sort of rustic
Yeah.
understanding.
So interspersed in that scene of a rural reality, he would have uh, maybe a pose of an embracing couple,
Yeah.
a Methila couple. But he would kind of a mix and match. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
So that's what he does. But then is experimenting and he is trying, like I said, to balance his anima, the inner feminine, which is so strong in a masculine psychology, which takes decades. Maybe a man is 60 years old and still his anima is not balanced. He projects it on other women. He's not owned his own feminine. He does not have that intuition and wisdom and that maturity. Because the world mythologies have acknowledged that wisdom is feminine. It's a feminine energy, Shiva, the feminine side. Yeah? And so what was I coming to?
You were talking about maybe other artists who
Yes,
were
other
able
artists. So then
to-
I came upon Ravindra Reddy.
Okay. Ravinder.
Ravindra Reddy. Like I think he is there.
Yes.
Very strong and yeah, he's carved quite a few sculptures.
Yes.
So these are the two artists that I would name. And for let's take it to a masculine psychology and the male nude. So I would say
Yeah,
Bhupen
I
Thakkar,
wanted to ask you next.
Bhupen Thakkar and Rameshwar Bhuta.
Right.
Yes, of how they've delved so deep into that psychology, the masculine psychology, and in that masculine psychology is the anima plays a role.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I would also talk about women artists because my journey as a woman through Suza's and many other artists through his work, which led me to many extensions, like you brought it out in your first question. Yeah. So, how my journey has become so beautiful and nourishing. So, I would say, Rini Bhuman of the Baroda School of Art.
Yeah.
Like how she has experimented and explored the feminine psyche. So she's got women on her canvas. They are, sometimes there's this unbent, willful sense of determination in those women who've come into their own. They know what we are. Yeah? So they fight, they are frustrated at other times, they show like that, all kinds of emotions.
They are
entire
thoughtful.
gamut. They're
Yeah.
thoughtful, they're
They're tender.
contemplating, they're tender. They are, or they just like sitting silently and watching, but they never give up. So Rini Dhumal, I would say no. Yeah.
Beautiful. So, maybe we both. I mentioned that the red goddess, which in fact you have in your slides,
Yeah.
is such a powerful image, and it just sort of made me stop at that page for a really, really long time because I had never seen that work, and I think there is so much energy there. If one were to see the actual painting, I would imagine. So maybe we can have a look at that, and if you'd like to talk about a couple of works that really, really drew your research forward, because as you mentioned, it's like a 12-year long journey into these studies, and but there must have been highlights. There must have been some places where you took a twist and turn in your own research. So if you could talk about a couple of those places as well.
So should we like screen the red goddess first? The first space. Yeah. So that's the red goddess which Souza painted in 1966. And many things came together because I thought when I looked at this, I was so struck. I was so struck by this. It's like a very visceral connection that I had, thought provoking, and also it was very cathartic for me to look at this work. Um, Three main narratives or thoughts which came together, or philosophies which came together was the first one is that this is an archetypal image. It's part of the human collective unconscious. It does not belong to Souza's personal unconscious, I would say, because of its similarity in many other communities across the world. This
Right.
archetypal image, yeah, and another one is that D.D. Kosambi, I told you, he undertook a project of the Mother Goddess in the Konkan belt.
Yeah.
And he traced the veneration of the Mother Goddess from prehistoric times and its metamorphosis and unbreakable thread to 20th century religious practices in the Konkan belt. Yeah?
Right.
And like in his writings, he goes to how when the nomadic tribes, they met the pastoral groups and how their goddesses were married off to the gods and they became more like concerts and vibes and they were never single women anymore.
Right.
Yeah, the mother goddess. So he goes into all that kind of history, and the mother goddess cult in Goa came together with this image for me. Besides the archetypal image, then I thought the mother goddess cult of, you've got Gajalakshmi laterite stone sculptures in forest groves of
Yes.
Goa. You've got Durga. Then you've got the Gurdi goddess, which is found on the banks of the river, which is a 2,000-year-old mother goddess. The image that Pantalao Fernandez kindly has lent to the book. Yeah. And so that worship, and those red marks on stones in fields and all that. So it's such a long thread, just goes back all the way. And he paints this. Yeah. And then the third thing which came together for me was the Devi Mahatmya play, which is performed by the Yakshagana artists.
All right.
And the Karnataka Sangam takes it up in a big way. But of course, Yakshagana were traveling theatre group.
Yes.
Okay, they performed at different temples. And the Devi Mahatmya is what my research tells me, that 1 lakh performances, and they have 16,000 advance bookings for the next 10 years. So it's one of the most performed plays through music, dance, through all those costumes, through yeah. And what is Devi Mahatmya? It is an attempt to define divinity as a feminine principle. That is what the essence of Devi Mahatmya is. And so the narrative threads together myths of pre-existing goddesses. Many of them, the Matrikas, the 7 Matrikas.
Yes.
Yeah, some of them like Nepal and Afghan, 8 Matrikas and so on. So all those. So it threads through and this goes on for a whole night, the performance. So when he comes out with this in 1966, I also thought, Vidya Dahija, this is a yogini standing here with that animal head. Yeah?
Completely.
So it is a theomorphic. It's theomorphic, animal head with a woman's body. It's a siddhi. It's a yogini. But Vidya Dahija studies happened in 1986. In 1968, she had just like completed a PhD, and this was done in 66. So it wasn't out there. And before that, the archaeological survey was done by Alexander Cunningham in the late 19th century, turn of the 20th. He had mentioned it, but nobody really took notice of that much. And it's only Vidya Dahija who went into it in a big way with police guard and everything, and then she did her research. That was in the
Yeah.
80s. So where did he get this image? It's an archetypal image which came from the unconscious. This we can just conjecture.
Yes.
Yeah. Though the Hirapur temple, the Yogini temple in Hirapur, which is very near the Bhubaneswar temple site, was discovered in 1953. And yeah, and that was given some kind of coverage. But that time he was in London and he was so taken up. He was a British star. Not a British star at that time. He became in 55. But then, yeah, he was grappling with that life and he was quite, finding it so difficult to make ends meet. And
Yes.
he wanted to become an artist. And so, yeah, these are the various things which came up when I looked at this. The various narratives which came into my mind then.
Yeah, quite powerful. So, do you have another couple of them, like I mentioned, these turning points in your entire research? Even if you can just speak about them or describe them.
The image after this. So yeah, so I thought we could kind of take the theme to animal imagery.
Yes, exactly.
And so this is a sketch which is beasts in combat. Okay, so there is a beast. There's one beast which is so apparent, and we can see that beast. And the other two beasts are human beings. But the human being is not seen. He's not shown the human being. What he does it, he shows he shows shoes, one pair of shoes between the front two legs. You have to study it closely.
Yeah.
And one shoe, the mouth of the animal is open because he's being reined in. He's being trained. So the mouth of the animal is open wide, and in that wide mouth is one shoe in front of it. So there's one shoe that, and two shoes in between the front two legs. So those are the human beings here. So there are three
The
beasts.
beasts.
There are two human beings and one animal.
Tussle.
Yeah. And he is using synecdoche here. Like a part symbolizes the whole. So the shoe is symbolizing the whole human being. There's no need to paint the whole human being. Isn't that very like whimsical and very playful also, and also I would say very intelligent. And show the next painting is of this horse being trained, and here's again synecdoche, the two ropes being pulled.
Yes.
That's all. It signifies that he's being trained and reined and like he's howling and very miserable. He's not shown the human being, just those two ropes and the tension in those two ropes. Is it clear the work? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it should be visible.
So it's such a psychological painting of the animal and his trauma.
Yeah, and that's.
And the perpetrator is off the screen, just the two ropes.
Yeah, prodding, poking, and pulling. Yes, I think that looking at many works now in connection with the various philosophies and histories that you have been able to relate through your journey, I think that for all of us it would be a matter of taking these seeds, as I said, and sort of planting them in our own thought processes of how we read ourselves and the work separately and together. So this is actually. Is there also a continuation of this? Is this book the sort of end of the study, or is it an ongoing study? Is it continuing?
Uh, yeah, that's an interesting question because the book is about the evolving human consciousness. That's the essence of the book. My own consciousness through whatever became
Yes.
my. And human consciousness studies is where Debashis has written the foreword.
Which
And
is
he is a
wonderful.
consciousness scholar. Like his latest book came out now, Quantum Consciousness. So I would say that it is such a contemporary topical thing going on, that we are all part and parcel of the evolving
Yeah.
cosmos.
Yeah.
And we are co-creators, each human being. Yes? Uh, so the book ends with the balancing between the conscious and the unconscious. Is the first step of a human being. And it takes a whole journey, your whole life to do that. Through whatever you do, whatever your profession, vocation, your personal choices, whatever. But there's an inner story going on all the time. And the more people are invested in the inner story, the better world is around them. Yeah. So I would say that this is an ongoing thing.
It is ongoing.
Yeah, and also like it's a critical study, and a critical study is like not only that it makes you understand the text and the various threads that you bring in, the patterns and the interpretation of those patterns, and then maybe a evaluation of that, but also that it not just makes you understand the text, but the world of how this whole thing is, the meaning of life and all that. And then finally, that critical study brings you back to yourself, to the reader, to his inner. That's where I'd like to try to draw. It's an endeavor.
Yes, and we are, in fact, yes, we have finished an hour of this
all right.
wonderful discussion.
Okay.
But before we maybe open it up to comments and questions, if you'd like to maybe do one more reading from the book, and then, we open it up to audience interaction.
So I'll do it from the last chapter. So I would like to say that the book is divided into 5 sections. And the first 2 sections is a feminist reading of Suza Azad. The third section is his growing up years in Goa and Bombay. And the fourth and fifth section is to do with consciousness studies. And it's drawn both from the East and the West. Is when I began and I was in this chaotic place. It's like East and West have been at loggerheads for centuries. So my endeavor in this book was to draw equally from the East and West philosophies and artistic practices. And so the last chapter is more to do with from a lens of Jungian psychology.
If you could hold the mic as well, so that it's a
So bad
necessity.
Yeah, I know. Souza's anima was a powerful force which stood him in good stead in his individuation journey. Anima, the deeply mysterious feminine, personified as Beatrice in Dante's Divine Comedy, played a stellar role in Souza's psychic life. The anima, according to Jungian philosophy, is the feminine within a man's psyche, most active in visionaries, prophets, and shamans, responsible for understanding of the irrational, earth, and nature, as well as the dark unconscious. An abnormal anima can cause havoc on a psychic plane, resulting in weird erotic fantasies, extreme moodiness, and dysfunctional sexuality. But on the positive side, it aids the masculine psychology to find balance and establish a deep connect to the ghost world, which is the mysterious unconsciousness, from where all our insights and creativity and everything comes from. And I would say a parallel to this would be the feminine psychology. And in the feminine psychology, according to Jungian theory, there is the animus. And that becomes the spirit guide for women if they kind of, balance it. And yeah, it rewards them in so many ways. So should we open it to the audience now?
Yes, yes.